Hey everybody, welcome back. For those of you that are new, my name is Susan of Susan Barnes Editing. I am a freelance editor who specializes in science fiction, fantasy, and romance, and today we're going to be talking about pre-writing. Pre-writing is more than just plotting, it is brainstorming the building blocks of your story before you start to dive in. And this is helpful because it can keep you from having to do a lot of major backtracking or edits, not only as you write, but also once you get to that endpoint and dive into the editing process. So today I'm going to talk about the 4 essential steps that I recommend you do before you start writing. Step 1 is do your research. So what genre are you writing? You may already know, and if you do, that's fabulous, but you would be surprised how many authors send queries that say, hey, I have written this YA science fiction mystery with a coming of age story and a touch of romance. Your story may have all of those factors, but that is complicated and you want to simplify what main genre your book is going to fall into. So to help with this, imagine your book is going to be finished and published tomorrow and you were able to walk into a bookstore and see it. Where would it be shelved? Would it be shelved in science fiction and fantasy? Would it be shelved in one of the subgenres of YA or romance? If so, which subgenre? Or is it just going to be in general commercial fiction? Deciding this is going to help you along your journey in figuring out how you want to publish, what market you're going to be targeting, and a variety of different factors. Then once you've decided what genre, I highly recommend reading at least 5 to 10 novels that have recently published in that genre. Now, for most of you that love reading as much as I do, you probably have already done this, so you can skip this step. But if you haven't, or if you're branching out into a new genre that maybe you don't usually read, I highly recommend doing this, not only to familiarize yourself with successful authors, successful tropes, how it was written, everything like that, but also just to see what's out there now versus what published 5 years ago. Because as you're writing, while you shouldn't write to a trend, you want to be aware of the trends that are going on so you know how your story can fit into there. Then you also want to think about whether or not you're aiming to traditionally publish or self-publish. So obviously, writing the book is going to be the same either way, but the market might be different, the length might be different, there might be some different factors depending on which way you're going to go, as well as your time frame. So if you're doing traditional publishing, you can query whenever. If you're self-publishing and you have a plan to do several novels in a row and you want to plan out a whole publishing journey in that direction, that's something you want to consider now so that you can take that into account as you plan this story and those beyond. Now I want to mention this, all of the things I just mentioned can change and adjust as you move forward. It doesn't have to be concrete, but thinking about these steps, taking these steps before you start writing can really help so that when you do hit a snag or when something changes, you can know how that's going to affect everything else in your publishing plan. Now I want to dive into the second part of pre-writing, which is the building blocks of your story. So this isn't quite plotting yet, but it's close. It's what you want to decide before you start writing as far as how you're going to write. So what point of view are you writing this story in? Is it in first person, third person? Is it in second person? Huge shout out to N.K. Jemisin, who wrote a fabulous fantasy called The Fifth Season, and it was in second person, and it hurt my brain a little bit to read, but it was so fabulous and such a unique way of doing things. So is that something you want to go after, or do you prefer the more general first person or third person that people are more used to? Also, are you telling this in single or dual point of view? So for fantasy readers, generally it's dual or more point of view because you're in a group, you have several people that you're following. Or romance, a lot of times it's either first person, single point of view, or many times now it's very popular to do first person dual point of view so that you can see both the hero and the heroine's side of the romance and see how they grow together. So deciding this ahead of time is going to help because then you can plot the novel accurately as far as how you need to see the chapters switch, who's seeing what, where the action is happening, and you can divide all of that out. Now, if you don't like to plot your novel ahead of time, that's fine, but I still recommend figuring this out because if you get halfway down the story and realize, oh my goodness, they need to be able to see this point of the story, and you can't do that with the point of view that you have currently, there's going to be a lot of rewriting that's going to happen, and it can be a lot of work, or you're going to have to do some major edits and deletions, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. Once you have your story in mind, think about what the main character is going to need to see if you have an idea of how the plot's going to go, to figure out if there's going to be a change in point of view as far as who needs to see what. So if you have a procedural mystery and the main character is a lawyer, would it be helpful to also have a cop so they can see that side of things? Because if you spend half the novel having the cop tell the lawyer what happened when they went to book the bad guy, you're going to be telling versus being able to show the reader, have that action happen with them. So that is something that you want to think about ahead of time so that hopefully you can head that off at the start and have everything flowing as you write. Present tense and past tense is also a part of this, so you want to decide how you're going to write the story. These, I feel as though you can decide this based on what you prefer and what the market generally writes in. Figure out what feels most natural to you. And then series or standalone. So is this going to be a series? Is this something that you feel like there might be multiple books? Or is this going to be a one and done and you're going to want to move on? Again, this is something that you may not yet know, but if you can have an idea or have a feeling that, yeah, I'm going to possibly want to write multiple interconnected romances, that way you can start to figure out what sort of loose ends you might need to wrap up or leave to be able to figure out in book 2 and how that's going to work. And again, this is something that you'll figure out along the way and be able to plot as your story evolves, but being able to have that decision in your mind now will better prepare you for when you need to make those decisions later. The next step in pre-writing is story prep. So who is going to be your main character and what is their damage? What is their internal and external issues that they're going to be fighting throughout the story? I highly recommend, once you have this figured out, write it on an index card or a post-it note and stick that on your computer or on your notebook, however you prefer to write, because that is going to be your core value that you return to anytime they run into conflict, a decision, a problem, anything like that. You want to refer back to that and say, okay, with this in mind, does that affect how they're going to move forward? Added to that, then the next decision to make is, what is your main external conflict, the main hook going to be? So your main character and their damage might be that they're avenging their father. Maybe that's the reason they became a cop, and the external conflict is actually a mystery that they're trying to solve. So it doesn't have anything to do with him avenging his father for the main plot, but there are some subplot parts in there that add to him trying to figure out, finally finding who killed his father, trying to get that revenge that'll eventually come to its climax in book however many you want to write. You also want to think about setting and tone while you're setting up your story prep. So setting, obviously, if it's in a gritty downtown of some sort of popular city, if it's in a small town Montana, if it's in a hospital somewhere, that's going to give you a different vibe, as well as could fit into what the market is used to seeing depending on what type of book you're writing, what genre you're writing in, and then tone as well. And this ties in with setting, main character, point of view, all of this ties into the tone. Is it, sarcastic? Is it funny? Is it really serious? Is it really dark? What are you intending to write? How do you want that to come across, and how does that fit into what else is out there? Again, this is all helping you not only to figure out how you want to write the story, but also figuring out how you're going to be able to sell the story, whether on your own or once you pitch it to an agent. Then you want to figure out your second main character. So hopefully, no matter what kind of story you're writing, you're going to have more than one main character, and there'll be a lot of interplay between the two of them. Again, looking at setting and tone. Maybe it's two doctors. Maybe it's a ranch hand and a wolf, and the wolf obviously has some sort of telepathy. I have no idea. Figure out that main character. If you can, figure out their damage, internal and external, so you can see how that plays with the main character you've already figured out. And then wrapping that all together, jump back and confirm your point of view. Confirm whether you want to tell this in first person or third person, whether you need to see both point of views for these two main characters, or if you can get away with just one. Looking back at point of view, once you've made all of these decisions, hopefully you'll be able to see a bit more clearly what the needs of your story might be, and again, avoid any major edits or rewrites along the way, having to go back and add a point of view down the line because something might be missing. The final step is story structure and outline. So this is something probably most of you are quite familiar with. So this is where you brainstorm the actual plot of your novel. You can do a lot of research into the different percentages or hit points of each story depending on your genre. There's a lot of great resources out there. I put a couple down below in case you would like any recommendations. I can also go more into this. As I mentioned earlier, I generally work in science fiction and fantasy and romance, which has very strong genre expectations as far as how a story arcs and what happens and who's in it and what's going on with that. So it's really interesting to see not only how authors use that, but also how authors bend that to make their story unique. So this is where you would plot if you are somebody who wants to plot the entire story, or you can skip this step and just jump straight into writing. So if you are more of a person who just wants to sit down and write, a self-proclaimed pantser, that is perfectly fine as well. I would still recommend doing the first few steps, even if you don't like to outline, because they really can save you a lot of time and heartache along the way. And then once you've figured out the main building blocks of your story, dive right in and see where it's going to take you. And that's pre-writing. It's very simple. It is also very malleable, so it's not something that you have to stick to once you've made the decision, but it is something to keep in mind as you're plotting and as you're writing, so that you can just adjust along the way and you can end up with a really great story that's either ready to be edited or ready to go out for a query, and you don't have a whole lot of backtracking or edits to do. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out either here or on social media. I would love to hear from you, and I can't wait to see what you start writing. Hey everybody, if you love this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe below. Thanks!